Hello, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and welcome to a very special solo episode of Monomaniacs. Dylan Strahle couldn't be here today, and because of that, we had to reschedule an interview, so I decided that I would take the time to really let you know what I've been thinking about lately. I know that when you're listening to our conversations, especially between Dylan and I, you're thinking, when will this Dylan guy shut up and just let Shad take control? Really be the focus of attention. He isn't assertive enough. That's my number one, criticism I hear from people, especially Dylan's wife, is that I'm not assertive enough on the show, that I'm too nice to Dylan. That's a really common criticism. So I think today is the day that we rectify his alpha personality and kind of put me in the driver's seat so that I can, give you the straight dope. What's really going on behind the scenes and kind of conversations that go on, not between him and I, or between him and I and a guest, or between us and Silas separately, or between us and Josh separately, but between me and me, the two people who really matter for these conversations. It's going to be a little different than when Dylan was in charge. Dylan had a full production. Here was a little bit more last minute, so we don't have the sound effects board or fake applause. I'm just going to imagine those things because I know at home, when I say something that's really on the nose, that really makes sense, you'll be applauding. And I'm confident enough in that I don't need a fake noise to know that that's true. So what I wanted to talk about initially today is that a couple of weeks ago, I nearly cried. Now, this wasn't because of some sort of emotional problem. It wasn't because somebody was hurt or something that was dear to me was destroyed or anything along those lines. No, I nearly cried, and I was close. There was tears. None of them left my face, and I did not make an audible sob or anything along those lines. I nearly cried when I was watching a movie. Now, what I'm about to say is going to sound silly. It's going to sound kind of ridiculous, but I was watching the movie The Ghost in the Shell, which is a anime movie from the 1990s. Now, I wasn't crying because of the plot, because the plot blows. It's not a very well organized movie. I was crying because there was a shot in the movie that was so pretty, and it wasn't even I don't know. The anime movies from the 90s are very beautiful, but it wasn't even one of the more exceptional shots. It was just something that had a lot of technical grace to it. It's like this corner shot of this skyscraper. If you've seen the movie, it's like a corner shot of this skyscraper with all these power lines around it. And it just looked like it took the person hours of their life, weeks perhaps, to get the cells drawn, get the animation constructed. And I was so impressed by it that I nearly cried because I was reminded of something. I was reminded that at the end of, and this is going to sound like a strange transition, but I was reminded of some words from St. Thomas Aquinas' life. Right before he died, it's said that St. Thomas Aquinas was granted a vision where he saw the glory of God because of his work. And afterwards, Jesus apparently told him that he had written well of him. But afterwards, Thomas Aquinas famously said that all of his work was straw, that it was nothing, that his lifetime of study, of philosophy, of theology, being one of the most accessible but most cited and important philosophers in Western history, was nothing, that he had wasted his time. And a lot of people, have different opinions about what that means about his work, but I was watching this video, I was watching this anime movie from the 1990s, and I saw this shot, and I thought to myself, what the hell am I doing with my life? You sometimes see something that is so beautiful that is not a masterpiece, right? It's not something that took the person all, years of their life and is the culmination of their artistic expression. It's just something that is one frame in one movie from the 90s, which may have been a few weeks or a month or so of this artist's life, but it wasn't something that they were thinking about in the context of being the culmination of their life work. It was just something they did that was a part of this movie, and it's so much more beautiful and so much better than anything you'll ever do. When you work in mediums like me, right? Artistic mediums that are not artistic, like this, like talking to you directly, right? you're not leaving the same kind of indelible mark that someone who spent enough time drawing when they were young, or a musician who really put the time into becoming a virtuoso or anything along those lines can do at the drop of a hat, you know? And even though I've never written the Summa Theologica or anything equivalent to it, if that's straw, then I suppose hosting Monomaniacs might also be considered straw in some ways. So what I've been trying to think about a lot lately is, what is it that we're doing? You know, what is it that any of us does when we're trying to make content? You know, when we're trying to be known and seen in a world where everybody gets to be known and seen, but be known and seen a little bit more than our peers, hopefully get paid if you're lucky, or, you know, get a deal with a, you know, male enhancement or anti-balding company or something. The thing to which we all aspire as podcasters, you know, having Alpha Brain knock on your door and saying, like, does your dick not work? You know, and telling people they just need to use code Monomaniacs so their dick works. In my mind, if we were to reach that point, you know, which is ostensibly what we're trying to do here, that would be that wouldn't be very exciting, would it? You know, that wouldn't be a work of any relevance. You know, and I know, and a criticism that some people are going to probably be thinking right now is, well, those people, the people who do that art, you know, I'm looking at this wall right and behind this camera right here, and I see a lot of posters and drawings on it, and, you know, things that I'm not physically capable of doing and that have actual direction and some beauty to them. Every time that somebody, an artist of any capacity, does any work, there's a good chance that they're incredibly critical of themselves. That we often put our own impression onto other people's work because we think that, you know, they're reaching something that we'll never be able to reach, but they at the same time are thinking the same thing about anything else that they see, right? And even the greatest artists and who've done some of the greatest work often walk away from it under the impression that they're hack losers. Now, I know for a fact that I'm a hack loser. That's just something that I've fully come to terms with, sitting here in front of this microphone, talking to you directly. It's okay. It doesn't mean you should discount everything I have to say. But I'm struck by how much everything everybody does is now entered into some sort of information stream and disappears. You know, that person who drew those animation cells for those frames for that movie made a huge impact in the 90s, and that movie was a part of kind of popularizing the genre in the United States when it was, you know, bootlegged over. The dub is terrible, by the way. I couldn't find it with the sub, but the dub is really, really bad. That movie isn't very good. I don't know. I'm sorry if there's any real Ghost in the Shell heads out there, but the movie's not good. The plot's bad and the pacing's weird, but it's gorgeous. Every frame of it's gorgeous, but the plot's bad, the pacing's weird, and the dub is terrible. I imagine the Scarlett Johansson version was much worse for obvious reasons. ScarJo, famed Japanese person. But even though that's a very culturally important and relevant thing that came out, you know, like, it's nothing compared to, say, the cultural relevance of Akira, which came out roughly the same time. But now it's just sort of a drop in the pool compared to the everything else that the average person can kind of see and do. You know, the fact that the average person on TikTok is seeing artists in every medium being put in front of their face constantly, you know, at 10-second intervals. And it doesn't matter how much time the person spends on the thing. It doesn't matter whether or not it is virtuosic or virtuosic. I guess I'm messing up there on the pronunciation, but it doesn't matter how beautiful or whether or not the thing is a magnum opus or anything along those lines. It's only going to get tacit recognition. And so these people are putting all of their time and their effort. This happens a lot with Twitter artists. It's why we actually, went to an actual Twitter artist and we commissioned them to draw our t-shirts, because, there's a lot of people who are just drawing constantly. They want to be artists. They went to art school. They're doing all this stuff, and all they're doing is just sort of putting their work into the ether and hoping that somebody pays attention enough to give them like $100, and it's just happening constantly with everything. It's happening with music. I've been watching a lot of YouTube videos about how producing different styles of music, because every once in a while I kind of go on a kick on that. And I try to, I challenge myself every day to try a new genre or something along those lines. And when I do that, I think to myself, these people have 150 subscribers and they're making something that isn't necessarily inspired, but took time and required them to learn the thing. And they're learning a lot about sound design and the genre and all this stuff. And 100,000 people maybe, and it's a total lifetime, are going to see it ever. And that because the person is putting that thing on the internet, that there is a certain level of recognition that they're expecting from it. That they want the thing to be appreciated. Because if it was truly for yourself, which is what a lot of people say when it comes to stuff they put up on Instagram or TikTok, or, that's a lie that a lot of podcasters tell themselves, that the reason that they're doing it is for them. And that could be true in some capacity. I promise that if it is true for you, you're definitely an anomaly. And if you tell yourself that it's true, I promise you that it won't be in like a year and a half of uploading something and getting no traction. Luckily for us, that's not something we tell ourselves, right? For Dylan and I, this is for the patrons and this is for our friends. And so that's the thing that keeps us honest and keeps us doing it. But if it was truly for yourself, then you wouldn't put it up on the internet, There used to be, back in the day, people would put stuff up on the internet that was just for themselves, but that was usually because it was for archival reasons. Now with YouTube and algorithmic structures and TikTok and all that stuff, you do want to be recognized. You want people to see you. But these things are democratized. Everybody can do them. Everybody can be a part of it. And whatever it is that you find value in, or you find that you want people to recognize you for, you're never going to actually get. There's some people who do get that recognition. There's people who put the work in. And the guy actually we were planning an interview today, who we're going to interview later once Dylan is able to be back with us, is a guy like this, where, he just put the work in and really made it happen and is being recognized for his work. And we're really excited to talk to him. But a vast majority of people that doesn't happen for. Maybe, just maybe, hear me out on this, we should really start reevaluating why we do anything, or really start reevaluating why we put our work of any sort of artistic capacity in front of other people. Because, and I think that different traditions and different people would have a different answer to where one can find meaning, right? I think that the internet is telling us, because we see people who have recognition, we see people who make a lot of money, we see people who are able to sell the male enhancement drugs, and we think to ourselves, man, I those people have it, or they're somewhere. What their work is and what they do is bringing them happiness, or bringing them self-actualization. Because a lot of people talk about happiness, and I don't think that's the right framework there. I've realized that this is something worthwhile for me to keep doing and worthwhile for us to do, and we have a ton of fun with it. But making it a priority as the thing that's going to say, help us make it, what is it, whatever that even means, is a trap. It's dangerous. Because you're going to wake up one day and you're going to watch a movie, or you're going to go to a museum, and you're going to resent the things that you see. You're not going to be giving them the respect that they deserve, because, you're thinking, why am I not there? Why is my work not worth it? Why is my, what I'm bringing to the culture not valued by other people? And you can hope one day for that to be the case, but it just most likely won't be. And putting that as at the center of your life, or at the center of what you do, is just going to result in a perpetual state of jealousy and weird tacit rage, I'd say. And I think I can see that in a lot of people. I think it's why, strangely enough, the artificial intelligence artistic movement is so strong. Despite the reaction against it, there's thousands of Facebook pages and stuff that are railing against artificial intelligence art. And I don't like artificial intelligence art. This isn't a defense of it in any capacity. But I think that in a world where we're democratizing everything and everything is happening so quickly, and even if you do spend time on work, it's going to be taken, chewed up, and spit out almost instantaneously, and you maybe walk away with a million views, which isn't even anything anymore, especially if you're talking about something like TikTok or Instagram. You walk away with 1 million views and maybe $150 because somebody saw it and commissioned you for some work. That's hours and hours and hours and hours of work for, you can say that you're proud of your stuff, but the way that people are taking art and digesting it is the same way that artificial intelligence is producing it. It's a perfect relationship for itself, And right now it's very easy to see, but soon it won't be. And it's tricking the boomers who are scrolling, And one day there's going to be technology that tricks us as we're scrolling. And it almost is creating this self-perpetuating thing where it could just go on forever. Eventually there's not even going to need to be human input in the same way, or they're going to be able to automate that production. They're automating text. They're automating all this. There's this thing that keeps coming up on my Facebook that is absolutely terrifying to me, which is, it's like the most half-assed AI-generated historical characters. You know how like everybody in AI is weirdly attractive and is in the soft lighting situation, and it'll be like, this king ruled from this year to this year and was really good. The big thing that they do is they say like, oh, this was the first woman pirate or something. And then there's just a woman who looks like a Victoria's Secret model wearing a white blouse, and it's like, this is her. And you're like, okay, sure, whatever you say. Artificial intelligence is a little bit of a digression there. But to get back to the center of it, the time that we spend on a thing, the value that we see in it has to be coming from the right place and really does have to bring us joy, because we're just getting to a point where it's just not going to, everything has been so perverted as far as our relationship to the individual and to artistic expression and to the value of what somebody produces, that eventually it's just gonna, I don't know, totally and completely cease to exist. I don't know. That's sort of beyond what I want to talk about today. But to kind of wrap up this opening thought, if you're feeling stuck right now when it comes to your expression, and I know this is sort of like a personality thing. Like for me, like I feel like I have to have something. I have to have something that I'm doing that is artistic in its nature. And I do desire that recognition. And that's not how everybody is. There's some people who are fine just, playing Fortnite or whatever. And I'm happy for you. You live a much happier life than I do in a lot of ways. But for anybody who might be listening to this who feels like, man, I wish I was doing what somebody else is doing, or man, I really am kind of falling back in not being a good artist, being a good musician, being a good broadcaster, being et cetera, things that are non-work oriented expression skills, right? Sit down and really reevaluate why it is that you do it and the time that you spend on it. Are you using that time efficiently? Are you actually improving? Is it something that you are doing for reasons other than fame, fortune, or money, right? Because you're just not going to be happy. Just won't happen, And you might just be home from work. Your wife and son have gone to bed. No, actually, your son's in bed. Your wife is at book club. and you make a double gin and tonic and some popcorn and cry watching an anime movie. So before that happens to you, I would start reevaluating yourself just a little bit. Sorry to be all preachy. It's just sort of something I've been thinking about. On lighter news, or in lighter conversation, I want to talk about taxes. Something that a lot of people would prefer to talk about this time of year. I hope for, if this is your first, if you're hearing about your taxes on this podcast, which is coming out long after your taxes are due, hop on any sort of tax service and get to work on that ASAP. You're going to have some problems otherwise. I want to talk about a conversation I had with somebody recently about taxes. So this person, who shall remain unnamed, who is getting into the business of business, starting one, called me to ask me questions because I ran my own business for a few years and still do. And they're asking me about what they have to do to pay as little taxes as humanly possible. There's this funny thing about taxes that I think that people... So there's this colloquialism that the IRS is less likely to audit you than you are to be struck by lightning. This is a classic story. It's not true because there's a lot of different mitigating factors that are more likely to get you, pointed at and under the eye of Sauron, that is the IRS. They're more likely to audit poor people. This is something that people don't talk about often. If you make less than 20 grand, your percentile likelihood of being audited is much higher because they know that you can't pay for representation and that you don't have an accountant, so they can walk all over you. So something to keep in mind. But also, if they do audit you, it can ruin your life. It's an incredibly intense situation, and I wouldn't wish it upon my worst enemy. But this guy was talking to me and he was saying, okay, I do all of my business through Venmo. And I said, well, you made a mistake right away. I don't know if people know this, but in the last year, Venmo, or the IRS just changed some of their policies so that if you have acquired any amount of cash over $200 through Venmo, you have to report it on your taxes. Much to the chagrin of every drug dealer alive who is making $450 on dinners, quote unquote. You do have to report that stuff now. And so that's not an option. And so he said, okay, well, what about, I want to do cash. And I was like, okay, well, I suppose you can do cash. Nobody has cash anymore. And then he went an extra step further and he said, well, what about employees? I want to pay employees. And I was like, okay, well, how much are you paying them? And he's like, well, blah, blah, blah. He essentially said that he was going to run a business where, and this is not tax advice or financial advice in any capacity, so don't quote me on any of this, but he was attempting to run a business by hopefully acquiring most of his money through cash and then paying everybody less than like $150 every time he paid them, and then firing part-time employees, not firing them because they're essentially independent contractors, before they make $3,000, which is the point at which you need to report the money to the IRS. And so as you can imagine, I told him not to do this, but it reminded me of a conversation that Josh and I had on the show a little bit earlier, to which Boomer offered some slight correction in the comments of the YouTube channel. Nowadays, people are just totally under the impression that tax fraud isn't a crime. And that's an interesting question in my mind. I think about it a lot because there's a lot of people who I have a lot of respect for in normal capacity who believe this. I remember a good friend of mine once saying that tax fraud was a victimless crime, and that they had a total leeway to not do their taxes properly. I know people who just don't do their taxes have not had any issues at all with that. Hopefully that remains the case. Hopefully that remains true for them. I would hate for their lives to be ruined by the IRS over it. But I am often struck by the give Caesar's what is Caesar's passage in the Bible. And I wonder, I'm not an expert on that sort of question and on that passage or on the nature of sin, really. I'm an expert in the nature of sin as I have done much field work in the area of study, but I am not an expert on the theological background for sure. My guess is that tax fraud is a sin. I'm just going to say that. I'm just gonna come out on that one. That's my conclusion. And the reason why I say that is because you are lying, I guess, in some capacity. You are asked to make an account and you give an improper account, which in my mind is bearing false witness. But I may be wrong there. Josh, you have a pretty strong libertarian streak.
Yeah.
And as a reformed guy,
yeah,
you have a very anti-tyranny streak as well. So what's your impression on this?
That is true. Although I think my libertarian streak weakens year after year after year.
Very few of them still exist. That's the funny thing about them.
Yeah.
They're a dying specimen.
That said, I think I've always, I am a very law and order kind of person, though, and I think as a reformed person, it's important to have a very ordered understanding of the law and of grace and that kind of thing. And I've always understood give unto Caesar to be exactly the same thing as I've always had the same exact reading of that you have, that it's even used in Scripture in the same way. It's like, should we pay our taxes? And Jesus is like, yes, pay your taxes. I don't know how you can, subscribe to the scriptural reality and then bail out of that one. So if there was any other way to interpret it, but it's not apples to oranges there. He's like, this is about taxes. So it's like, okay, well.
Yeah, the problem is, though, is, I would say that a lot of people kind of are they're experts at picking and choosing when it comes to that, specific question, especially the question of Jesus saying something directly. Divorce comes to mind. But I think that, I don't know, the people who, I'd be curious, I know that nobody would be willing to talk to me about evading taxes. Actually, I do know people who would be willing to talk to me about that, because I think they wouldn't be thinking straight.
But they shouldn't.
They really shouldn't. And I would never do that to somebody.
However, Shad, maybe we could do one of those episodes where their voice is modulated.
Yes.
Their face is blacked out. That would be a lot of fun.
And rather than talking to a coyote or like somebody who makes fentanyl, we just talk to a guy who just doesn't pay taxes.
Okay. we're
Is that aiding and abetting?
No, I think it's journalism. I mean, I think the 60 Minutes journalist that interviews a meth dealer or like a fentanyl trafficker isn't aiding or abetting that crime. So I think we should do it next week. It'd be fun.
Talking to a tax fraud. Committer. We should, we'll do that next week.
That sounds fun.
We'll do that next week.
Right.
For people who are wondering, actually, I don't know if any of the tax fraud committers I know are in town.
If you know, you know.
If you know, you know. Yeah. So if anybody's curious, actually, how about this? Start asking questions, in the comment section here or on the Patreon for things you would want to ask somebody who evades their taxes. And we'll make sure to curate the questions, put them all together, and then tell the person we're going to be changing their voice and then send it to the IRS.
Oh, got them.
Yeah. Or like, roughly how much money / assets or property have you not reported on your taxes?
So if you were filling out a federal form, what would you put in 10A and 10B?
Yes.
Precisely.
And then send that all to the IRS, and then I imagine they would give us a finder's fee. I wish that'd be kind of funny. Tax bounties. I like the idea of tax fraud bounties. That'd be kind of a fun thing for accountants to do.
Yeah.
They could like check out They could check out publicly available records, see if companies or organizations were committing tax fraud, and then rather than being paid by the government as an employee to investigate it, they could get like a portion of the money that was tax frauded.
So, you know how in the Bible, I think it's Matthew is a tax collector. Am I getting that name right? Is it Matthew? It's not Mark, right?
I think it might be Matthew.
I think it's Matthew. And he is a tax collector, and he's universally hated because he used his position to enrich himself.
Yeah.
This is just bringing back that time-honored tradition.
Time-honored tradition.
Yes, except it's making our local accountants, who are just members, pillars of our community, it's turning them against us. It's very totalitarian in a way.
Yeah. But in a good way.
I kind of like it.
I like the idea, how it's like turn your children against their parents. That is the first step for a real totalitarian society. You make it so that little Timmy reports their dad for having an Elvis record or something. That's how you really get things going. But what about Brent, your accountant? That's the real way to freeze the human liberty that exists in all of us, is to make it so that the accountants are out for it, out to get their own.
That could actually work very well. I think the IRS could sponsor a Mr. Beast video. Be like, hey guys, the video today is sponsored by the IRS. If your parents are talking about tax evasion, fill out the form in the comments below.
Yeah, and you could lick a Ferrari.
I'm giving away a Lamborghini to any fan who reports their parents for tax evasion.
That'd be actually awesome. I love that. I think that's something that we haven't really fully tapped into, is the authoritarian power that we can get through influencers. I know that a lot of them are being funded by foreign governments, or they are in touch with the White House or whatever. There's like a whole cadre of people who get talking points and make TikToks based off of them and stuff. And it goes for left and right in that capacity as well. But I think that we need to push it even further, so that like Raytheon is paying Mr. Beast to kind of be like, war with Iran is a great idea. I dropping $10 million worth of ordnance on a village, soy face. That'd be awesome. I would really like that.
I would watch that.
Like the Mr. Beast cast being like, we're doing a blindfold challenge where we're going to put everybody in this car. We're going to drive them to a remote location. And they all go in and they're doing the videos where they have the guy without the blindfolds, like pushing him around, making fun of him and stuff. And they just end up at these portables in Arizona. They walk into the portables and they're like, all right, this is a joystick, Most confirmed kills in a drone gets $100 million. I think that's an untapped way for our massive defense budget to go.
I mean, I think it could be better spent. There's a lot of bloat.
There is a ton of bloat with our defense budget. Incredible bloat. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure that there's people who make $150,000 a year to make PowerPoints. You know what I mean? Like that's no way to spend our money. Well, that $150 should go directly to Mr. Beast.
Yes.
So that he can drop a Warthog helicopter, which there are Warthog helicopters.
Nope.
Right?
That's an A-10.
A-10. Wait, I thought there was like
It's a Warthog.
Oh, okay.
It like flies low and slow and has a big Gatling gun on the front.
So there is a Warthog.
It's a plane though.
Plane. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let's just say
very cool.
We dropped the Warthog from 1,000 feet or whatever
onto
a pallet of Coke.
Or
I don't know. I'm trying to think of
Iranian
things that are
orphanage,
expensive.
maybe
An Iranian orphanage.
A wedding in Afghanistan.
And if the wedding in Afghanistan, if the bride and groom can survive, then he pays for a exclusive honeymoon in Ibiza or something.
I like that. That's good.
Yeah. And then we have like David Guetta do the soundtrack. I really like this idea.
Now, speaking about the defense budget, the U.S. Army is the official sponsor of the United Football League.
Wow.
And so it says Army on all their uniforms, and it's like on the banners. And
United Football League is in the like a minor league American football or soccer?
It is American football. It's the XFL and the USFL merged, and it's now the UFL. And it's like almost exclusively sponsored by the U.S. Army.
Nice.
And so there's all these pictures on The Rock's Instagram with him with a bunch of generals and stuff. And it's like, how much did this cost?
I bet you The Rock was like, I've got some stuff I want to talk to you guys about. He was like, I think that there's some things we could change. He's under the impression that he's the most competent and powerful man alive. I don't know. And based on what I've seen from WrestleMania this year, it might be true. It's a
Might be true.
possibility. But it's like that footage of him, or that picture of him talking to his team about like planning the Black Adam release or whatever, where they're all sitting down watching the movie, and you're like, gosh, like why did whoever convinced you that this was a good movie for one, and then he's like under the impression he can grind set his way to making a movie good.
It is interesting. I think it's commendable how many out of all the things that he has attempted in the last decade, that the Black Adam movie is the only thing that he really failed at. Like everything else knocked it out of the park. Unfortunately, the Black Adam movie was also the thing that he hyped up the most.
Yes.
It's like the hierarchy of power in the DC universe is about to change. And he just posted that on Instagram like 400 times, and then it sucked.
Yeah, that was one of those things. I think it's hilarious how the fan casting thing has ruined casting in movies. Where like somebody who is put into a really terrible Photoshop of themselves in a superhero costume can like retweet it on Twitter and then use the fact that millions of people liked it or whatever to like demand that they're cast as that character.
Right. Or
if they're not cast as that character, then there's this weird backlash in the community over it. And it's always just like whether or not they look like the guy. It's never a question about whether or not they're any good at the role. It's like that's how like John Krasinski got the like to be Mr. Fantastic in that
in WandaVision?
No. The second Doctor Strange movie.
Doctor Strange, that's what it was.
Yeah. Where it's like, oh, somebody just made this really terrible Photoshop edit of him with gray hair.
Yeah.
And you're like, okay. Part of me wonders actually, this maybe, I bet you that some of these people's PR teams do those. And post them as a way to kind of gauge interest so that they have leverage over Disney or any other organization. And I think also there's a chance that Disney and other organizations might post those themselves to gauge fan reaction. I feel like I've read that happen before, or I've heard about this happening before, but like this is like a thing that happens with leaks all the time, where somebody will leak something like a conversation that's happening between two people about, like potential casting for something or like potentially making a movie. And then they just see whether or not there's any internet traction based off of the leak before they make the decision.
I think if this is true, then the actor with the best PR team, who's absolutely knocking it out of the park, is Chris Pratt, who is in everything, animated movies, everything, which is easy work. Honestly, I was Googling to see how much John Krasinski made for being in Doctor Strange 2. I can't find it. It's not publicly available information. It had to have been a fair amount of money to probably show up for a week of filming or something like that.
What was the budget? Like,
let me look it up.
$500, $600 million? Not that much? Oh, that reminds me of something I got to talk about.
294
million?
Yep.
Okay. Well, you got to imagine that. I mean, I imagine that the VFX budget was astronomical. Still turned out terrible.
Oh yeah.
VFX was astronomical. I don't know. Sam Raimi isn't a super expensive director, so I imagine he wasn't super expensive. But
apparently, Benedict Cumberbatch. I almost said cucumber patch. I restrained myself. Apparently, he made $7.5 million, which is pretty good.
Krasinski then probably made $1.5 million, $2 million.
I would think so. I mean, he probably only had to be there for like a week of shooting or something, and then he ended up dying in a really depressing manner. So
he got turned into spaghetti. Yeah, the numbers that you were saying reminded me of something funny, of something I wanted to talk about related to military intelligence.
Oh, okay.
So recently, Reddit released numbers on like total users. And I think it was somewhere around 500 million accounts that are active or something, which is a lot.
Yeah.
And there was a breakdown that somebody did where they're like, okay, so Reddit claims that there's 500 million active users on Reddit. Okay. There is also a separate claim from Reddit that was not in that particular article, that half of the users on Reddit are American. Ergo, there would be somewhere around, or no, I think it was 70 something percent of the users were on Reddit.
That doesn't make any sense.
Or 50%. 50%. It was 50% of the users were American. My bad. It was, so that would, ergo would mean there was 260 million American Reddit users,
which is like
which is
a vast
75%,
majority of the American population.
75% of the American population, roughly.
Yeah, I know.
And so they were like, okay, well, this numbers can't line up. That's not physically possible. And then somebody else, it was like this Facebook thread I was looking at. Somebody else linked this article that I read, and it was talking about how, and this isn't like Facebook conspiracy rabbit hole stuff. This is all real, but there was this third-party company that did this research project to try and see what American cities were the most, this was in conjunction with Reddit, but which American cities had the highest Reddit user populations, to see who was the most Reddit pilled, I guess. I don't know. And the the area code with the highest concentration of Reddit users was just some Air Force base.
Oh.
And you're like, oh.
Okay. All right.
I get it now. No wonder.
It's all a psyop.
It's all a psyop. There's more. The funny thing about that was that would mean that there is more Reddit users, or more, I guess, Reddit users, quote unquote, fake Reddit accounts,
yeah,
on that Air Force base than all of New York City, all of Los Angeles, the most populous places in America, So,
in fact, is there even an Air Force base there? Or is it just a server farm?
Yeah,
that just runs Reddit.
Well, I'm sure there
accounts.
is a server farm on the Air Force base. Yes,
right.
It reminds me of the fact that there's a good chance that if somebody who you're looking at their account and you're like unsure about it, it's just a bot account or whatever. There's like phone farms in Macedonia where they just have guys, and this is, it's awesome. This job legit sounds amazing. Where they have archetypes for people that they construct. So like Resistance Dem or like MAGA Republican or something. And they make fake names for them that all kind of sound like they make sense for that sort of person. They use either artificial intelligence, or they just scrape Russian Facebook, or they scrape Facebook for random profile pictures, put them on there. And then a guy will sit there and he'll have 20 phones in front of him. And there's pictures of this. He's like, have like 20 phones in front of him on a board, and just follow all the relevant figures that they need to follow, that need their numbers pumped up. Follow all the relevant figures, and then just scroll and get into fights.
Wow.
They just call like people names. It's just all day. They just like things that this archetype of a person would agree with, and they have all of their phones, and they like all of it from all their phones. And then if somebody says something they don't agree with, or their character is not supposed to agree with, they just dogpile them with all the phones and write insults, and and call them losers and stuff.
I have a couple of questions.
And there's hundreds of people in these just warehouses doing this.
That's amazing.
24/7.
Is it kind of like the photo of the guy playing Pokemon Go on his bike, and he has like 20
yes
phones
it's like
in
that.
front
No,
of him?
it is like that.
So it's like that. The other thing I wonder is if on a daily or like quarterly basis, do you get assigned an archetype, or as you're switching from phone to phone, do you have to remember which archetype you are? You're like, oh no, I'm a liberal, I can't like dunk on this guy.
Yeah, I don't know. I imagine that
maybe it's like, okay, everybody switch. Everybody's going to be a MAGA Republican today.
I think they just keep it to like one person has one kind of attribute that they run as many bots as possible.
And then how quickly do those people get radicalized?
I don't know. It reminds me, and we've talked about this on the show, it reminds me of the fact that like most Facebook and Instagram and et cetera, like Amazon is like this to a certain capacity, but most of the American moderation responsibilities for troubleshooting reported content for Facebook and et cetera is work that's done primarily by migrants.
Interesting.
So they have these, it's a different type of portable in Arizona, but they have these portables in Arizona, and essentially they just take like middle-aged Mexican women who are fresh across the border, and they have them sit and like review every report of animal abuse. or every report of child pornography.
That's a terrible job. Holy
And
cow.
that their whole job is literally just to say, is this not animal abuse?
Huh.
You know? And that's like they just tick boxes on that. They'll just get their inboxes, because the crazy thing about Facebook and other platforms that people don't really talk about much, because mostly you're looking at the good and clean channels versions of those things, is that there's actually a constant battle. Like there are people who are constantly trying to push, the boundaries of those sort of things.
Sure.
Because, for people who have really deviant tastes, or say like, child pornographers are a good example of this. They're constantly trying to build themselves havens so that they can attract people to what they're doing. And so they're trying to like push on the envelope on different platforms so that if they, aren't being caught, they can tell other people to go to that place. Dylan saw this to a lesser capacity once when he was working for the town of Coldwater, and they have this live stream of a street corner, and somehow a bunch of mermaid role players found that stream's chat box and just decided to do their mermaid role playing on that chat box.
Okay, that's fun.
Right. And the whole point of it was like, look, we're being kicked off all these other platforms. Let's just go to something that we can find that has a chat function, which part of me is like, why don't you just do this in Discord or whatever? I don't know. That seems kind of strange to me, because it didn't seem nefarious. It was just literally people being like, I'm Red Scales and I am from Atlantis and this cove is really pretty. And is anybody down to go for a quick swim? You know what I mean?
It's probably all
maybe that's how they test the
federal
waters.
agents talking.
Maybe
to
they're
each
testing the waters, so to speak. And then once
pun intended.
yeah, pun intended, 100%. And then once they realize that people aren't moderating them or kicking them off, that's when like things get crazy and they start like putting people's IP addresses in there or something. But yeah, so it's like this constant war that you have to fight on any sort of platform, and the people who are at the front lines of it are usually just the most common of laborers. You know what I mean? It's not something that white collar professionals do. It's something that they sell off to people who are paid virtually nothing, have terrible hours, and are just undergoing actual psychological torture. And these people have like PTSD over it. It's like being in the military, essentially. No, I'm not trying to disparage that being in the military, because I'm sure that, if there is any veterans who are watching this right now, which if you're a veteran and you somehow made it to this point, then you deserve a medal. That's for
right.
sure.
That's right.
I'm sure you're going to be like, it's nothing compared to, they never been shot at. Yeah, that's true. But maybe a better equivalency would be like being an FBI agent or being a cop or something, just seeing a lot of...
Being a podcaster.
Being a podcaster, which, I mean...
Being a terminally online person.
Being a terminally online podcaster, I think, is probably... I mean, look, I don't ever toot my own horn in any capacity, but I think I'm braver than U.S. Marines.
Yes. 100%.
I think that anything...
I often think this.
I think that anything that the U.S. Marines have done, while brave, doesn't hold a candle to looking at this camera and talking incessantly about things that I've read on the internet. I think that there's this... You can't, they're just in different stratospheres. You can't even compare the mental strain and... have you guys seen the breakdowns of domestic abuse and marriages falling apart among podcasters? I would look into that before you made comments. Okay.
That's right.
Okay. Yeah, I read this article actually about this this moderation practice, and it's crazy because they're just like interviewing abuelas, and they're like, "Yeah, I can't sleep. I haven't slept in 6 years." And you're like,
"Oh, jeez,
man." This is not something, it's like, it's almost, there's always, with anything that we do, there's always that part of it, and no matter how squeaky clean an industry or a business is, there's always kind of the dark portion of it. And I don't know, we can have debates whether or not we're directly participating in that practice by paying supporters of a product or whatnot. It's like the blood diamond argument, but it's especially terrifying in that capacity. Luckily, I don't think it's killing anybody, which is for the best. Speaking of that, I was listening to a podcast about the movie The Lord of War, starring Nicolas Cage, which is about that guy who we traded for Brittany Griner.
Oh, yeah.
The Russian arms dealer.
Let me look up his name.
And it was on this podcast, really great podcast. You should check it out. It's called Spoilers with an exclamation point. I met the guy, one of the hosts, and he was super nice. I checked out his show. A great show. Would highly recommend it. Anyway, they were talking about this
guy's name was Victor Bout.
Yes. I think it's like pronounced like Boat or something.
Boat?
Yeah.
Victor.
And
Brittany Griner.
there's this whole thing in the movie. Most valuable trade in WNBA history for sure.
You're not lying.
Yeah, thousands of dead Americans for
That's right.
a hell of a jump shot. Thousands of dead Americans for great fundamentals. There's this whole point of this movie because it's just about a guy who is like this Ukrainian. Because it's not exactly about the guy. It's like some of his life story inspired it, but it's about this second generation Ukrainian immigrant who gets into arms dealing, and his life, he becomes like a Wolf of Wall Street-esque character where he's money and women and all this stuff, and then it all kind of falls apart around him. He gets away in the end, though, which is how that didn't end up working out for Victor eventually. But he goes through huge, great pains to explain away what he does, whether or not it's morally reprehensible for him to be a arms dealer. And I'm curious, sort of what he makes some points, and I'm wondering. I wonder about them myself. One of them is, if I don't do this, somebody will, which I think is totally illogical. It's like a classic claim that a lot of people in the cigarette industry make. They'll, even though the cigarette industry lied for years about the negative health effects of cigarettes, I think that now that cigarettes are out in the open, what they do is not a crime. I'm pro tobacco. I'm pro big tobacco now.
Yep. I'm right there with you.
But the other thing that he mentions is arms dealers make up only a tiny fraction of the selling of arms in comparison to legitimate governments. But so something that people don't know much about, and they didn't talk about this on the podcast, but kind of a star right now in that practice, especially selling to unstable regimes, is the government and manufacturing base of Sweden.
Oh,
which
didn't know that.
Yeah, which is a very tightened up and very outwardly facing, beautiful and friendly country. They make and sell large quantities of ammunition and arms. Of course, the United States of America is a part of said trade in a certain capacity. But it's always, it kind of actually relates to what we were talking about earlier when it comes to the question of tax evasion, where it's like, okay, well, if we're talking about something that, like, I feel like a similar argument for tax evasion would say, oh, if the government is wasting large quantities of cash on things that are either unjust or ineffective, then why am I giving it to them? This is just a drop in the pool. It's not actually going to make any difference. And the same would apply, say, to selling arms. And I thought that was an interesting argument for sure. It's like a kind of a get yours because everybody else is getting theirs sort of argument. I think that that doesn't negate his crimes in any capacity, but it made me think a little bit. I think that selling grenades to warlords in Africa is a really great way to commit a sin. I think that is pretty explicitly not a good thing to do. I want to take this time to thank our patron supporters, without whom we would not be here. We would not be continuing to do this great work, and let me know, patron supporters, for those of you who even made it this far, if this kind of format is something that you enjoyed. We didn't really have much time to prepare it. I think I could do it a lot better if I, took a few hours during the week to kind of prep my thoughts and organize some sort of full structured show. But regardless, thanks to the patrons, specifically the top patrons, Zach and Amber Strehle, Sammy Roberts, and Joe Papalardo, for their generous donations, as well as the rest of our patron supporters who allow us to do this, allow us to buy nice equipment, keep the show professional, and produce T-shirts. Everybody who was on the Patreon received T-shirts, and we're going to be putting up the rest of our T-shirts up for sale here pretty soon if people are interested. They're absolutely gorgeous. You can check out the previous episode where we showed them off and talked a little bit about them more if you want to. Specifically, the episode with Jake Coonrat. I think it's we dive into darkness or something. That's the title of it. Additionally, those who support on Patreon not only get beautiful shirts, but are able to get the backlog of our Patreon show, where we talk a little bit more candidly about things and usually do something reprehensible like rank every Star Wars movie, the sort of thing that is just too degenerate to put on the main channel.
There's a lot of really dank stuff in there.
Yeah, it's
not the Star Wars thing. That's very normie, but there's a lot of other dank stuff, and there'll be more dank stuff in the episode that we record after this.
Yes, there will be more dank stuff. I'm looking over at our list of things to talk about. What we didn't get to today really was OJ, which I think we're going to have quite the conversation about.
Yes, 100%.
In the Patreon. So if you want to hear a couple of yet another collection of white boys talk about the OJ trial and about OJ's ultimate fate, then feel free to hit us up on Patreon and we'd be happy to have you. It's nice. And, I think that there are a lot of Patreons for shows and podcasts specifically that skimp on what they claim that they give you. We don't. We're upfront. We're just giving you bonus content, and you have access to the Discord and
free T-shirts.
But we give you the bonus content. I don't think we've ever missed a Patreon.
Nope,
never once.
Never.
So, you get exactly what you're paying for. Plus, you get to support the show. So, more than happy to have you. So, I believe that puts us at near an hour.
Yep.
All right.
We're done.
So we're going to wrap up here. Folks, thank you so much for listening. If you are still listening, make sure to hit us with the like, subscription. If you haven't reviewed us on your podcast platform of choice, be that Apple or Spotify, we definitely would love it. Everything that you can do to do so. If you're actually kind of a weird thing, if you're looking, if you're not really listening consistently, but you still listen, it's really helpful that once you get the notification that the show is up, to at least open it. If you don't even have time to listen, and you want to come back and listen to it later, just open it up, potentially click on it, maybe drop the like then. And because the first few hours and the first few days of a podcast on YouTube or a podcast just on your platform, regular podcast platform, is really important algorithmically. So without further ado, though, we'll see you on the Patreon.